Former President and Prime Minister of Slovenia, to campus for a conversation about European diplomacy and security. At the end of the moderated discussion, there will be a question and answer session during which you may ask questions and engage in dialogue. Now I'm going to welcome Professor Elton Skendai of the Government Department up to the stage to deliver a brief introduction of what the talk is going to be.
Thank you and welcome. I'm Professor Elton Skendai. I direct the Democracy and Governance program here at Georgetown, and we're very excited to introduce you to the former President and Prime Minister of Slovenia, Dr. Borut Pahor. He's going to talk broadly on the impact of Russia's war on Ukraine in Europe, and we'll engage in a conversation together. I'm proud to say that he's a fellow political scientist. He has a degree in political science with a focus on international relations. As you probably, Georgetown is a great place to be as we brief policy and international politics on this campus. In 1987, he won the Prešeren and Zora Awards from the then Faculty of Sociology, Political Science and Journalism at the University of Ljubljana for his graduate thesis. He is also fluent in English and Italian and has a working knowledge of French. He enjoys being active in sport, and I like the fact we both have, our sons are named Luca, so that's great. Dr. Pahor, thank you.
Thank you for very nice words. It's a privilege for me to be here, and I hope I'll be at the level of your expectation. Now let us focus on the issue, geopolitical consequences of the Russian aggression against Ukraine for the peace and stability of Europe and the Western Balkans in particular. We will talk about the question is this is a new divide and a new wall. Ladies and gentlemen, Russia's aggression in Ukraine is changing the geopolitical landscape of the world and most of all of Europe. The war is still ongoing and has no end in sight. It is therefore impossible to make definitive assessments on the extent of the geopolitical changes the war will bring about. However, one thing is certain. What these geopolitical changes will be depends very much on the outcome of the war. If Russia wins, whatever that means, this will result in a period of lasting instability everywhere in the world, but especially in Europe. If Ukraine wins, whatever that means, some of the optimism for peace and stability that emerged after the fall of the Berlin Wall, the collapse of Warsaw Pact, and the dissolution of the Soviet Union will return to Europe. Ukraine's victory is of existential importance for peace and security in Europe, but also for the greater security of the international community as a whole. It depends to the greatest extent on the courageous resistance of the Ukrainian people and the Ukrainian leadership. But Ukraine cannot win this war alone. That is why its victory also depends on the military assistance and political support of the European Union and NATO in particular. It is essential that the West is united on this. Any weakening of this political unity of the West would seriously jeopardize Ukrainians' chance of victory. The political unity of the West to support and assist Ukraine includes military aid. Without it, Ukraine would probably have been defeated. The question therefore arises as to whether the West political support and military aid to Ukraine will last as long as it takes for Ukraine to win. We can only hope and do our best to ensure that this will be the case. If the war is protracted, its collateral consequences, from inflation to food and energy supplies, may erode the unity of the West. If an impression is given that the war could finally be ended, regardless of who wins and who loses, as long as there is a peace, a section of the public may particularly oppose the continued provision of military aid to Ukraine. This would be a threat to the political unity of the West and, consequently, to the aid to support the Ukraine. This would place Ukraine at direct risk of being defeated. This would be the beginning of the lasting instability in Europe and in the world. In this respect, it is very important that we maintain a consensus among the Western public about our efforts to work towards a just peace. This peace cannot be forced on Ukraine against its political will. We will consider a just peace to be peace that Ukraine accepts without coercion. If compromises are forced on Ukraine against its will because of the crumbling consensus of the Western public, the peace will not be a just peace, and above all, it will not be a lasting peace. It is therefore our job to try to make this clear to our public. When it comes to support and aid, the conduct of the United States is decisive. I cannot imagine that the United States could withdraw from providing aid to Ukraine without immediate consequences. First of all, this would jeopardize the unity of the West, but above all, it would jeopardize Ukraine's chances of victory and a just and lasting peace. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe we need to prepare for a long war, for a very long war. The problem is that Russia cannot afford to be defeated. In this sense, it is important what the Russian definition of victory and defeat are. We do not know exactly what definition of victory Putin has in mind. But as far as we know, it is in any case incompatible with the definition of victory as Ukraine sees it. This incompatibility is, for the time being, impossible for a compromise that we can imagine. Ukraine is not an Afghanistan for Russia. It is hard to imagine that one day the Russian army will simply withdraw from Ukraine, and it did as it did from Afghanistan. To understand the Russian aggression against Ukraine, one must bear in mind Putin's nostalgia for the Soviet Union, or at least for Russia's overwhelming influence in the part of the world that Putin sees as Russia's sphere of influence. Ukraine and Belarus are indispensable in his eyes, as far as this is concerned. Without them, this sphere of influence is displayed in Putin's eyes, it is moral and legitimate to defend it against the West. For the time being, we can only guess how much of this Putin nostalgia also resonates with the Russian population in general. I have known President Putin for more than 20 years. I first met him when he and US President Bush Jr. met in Slovenia back in 2001. But we worked together with President Putin particularly intensively over the past 15 years, when we were at the same time both prime ministers and then presidents of our respective countries. We met regularly and worked hard to build good relations between two countries. I was aware of his nostalgia and determination to somehow re-establish a strong Russian sphere of influence. However, what I did not know and did not believe was that he would be prepared to use force to do so. That is why I doubted to very last that he would attack Ukraine. It seemed to me that he could not have such poor judgment, and I was wrong, and he was wrong. Putin had poor judgment about the consequences of his military intervention. He did not count on the political leadership remaining in Kiev and leading the resistance, number one. Number two, he did not think that the West would be united in its support for Ukrainians' resistance. He counted on this being a Crimea Plus mission. It wasn't. I think that he now has no choice but to continue the war, unfortunately. He will adapt his definition of victory to the possibility of conquering as much territory as possible, at least eastern Ukraine, in addition to retaining Crimea. For him, it is not only important to prevent Ukraine from joining NATO. He is equally concerned about the mutual interest of the EU and Ukraine in Ukraine's joining the EU one day. Please do not forget that he invaded Crimea back in 2014, immediately after Ukraine decided to sign an accession treaty with the EU. He is not only annoyed with NATO, but also with EU. Why? And this is very important. Putin does not want to have democratic countries in his sphere of interest. It is Ukraine's democratic development that bothers him even more than the military presence of the West in Ukraine. Putin feels more threatened by the democracy than by weapons. His use of force for geopolitical ends is less irreversible than his path toward autocracy. If I'm right about this, then it is all the more difficult to see a way out of the crisis than his autocracy and nostalgic geopoliticals are creating. Ladies and gentlemen, all these new geopolitical circumstances in Europe are bringing about some fundamental changes. First, there will be no peace and stability in Europe, in particular for some time to come. If the great changes brought about by the fall of the Berlin Wall, the collapse of the Warsaw Pact, and the dissolution of the Soviet Union took place peacefully 30 years ago, perhaps the war in Ukraine is a historic sign that there is also an increased risk in the international community of the accumulated and concentrated problems in the world being resolved by force rather than peacefully. Number two, second, the war in Ukraine has underlined once again the importance of the North Atlantic Alliance. As long as the alliance between the United States and Europe is strong, problems will be easier to resolve. Part of this alliance is the EU's increased responsibility to devote more focus to its security through its common security policy. This strategic autonomy is not directed against the United States, but it is complementary and consistent with it. Number three, the war in Ukraine will accelerate the process of in-depth cooperation within the European Union. This will be a strong driver to change, including institutional changes, leading to a more integrated EU. I believe that sooner or later, we will see a new convention on the future of the European Union. As we know, a new European Constitution was drafted back in 2004 and then not adopted, but including because of the changed situation, there will be more understanding, I think, of and more support for such and similar changes. Number 4, Eurasia is emerging as a geopolitical space where China and Russia are joining forces. Both are united by autocracy and misgivings about the role of the West in world politics, and above all by a desire to increase their power in the world. One of the main questions is how the West, which maintains a one-China policy, can prevent the possible military takeover of Taiwan and the start of a new military crisis in the world. Number 5, after 3 decades of optimism that the fall of the Iron Curtain would usher in an era of lasting European peace and harmony, it seems that Europe will once again be divided by an Iron Curtain. As was the case after the end of the Second World War, one of the characteristics of this division will be a different attitude towards democracy. The West will maintain and strengthen democracy, the East autocracy. The West will be united by democratic values, the East by Russian political and military power. So we will once again have an Iron Curtain and 2 blocks that will threaten each other, crippling the development prospect of both. And finally, number 6. The question is where the border between the 2 blocks will run in the Western Balkans. Although it is a complex issue, I believe that it depends largely on whether Serbia chooses Brussels or Moscow. For the time being, this decision has not been yet been taken back in Belgrade, in Serbia, certainly not irreversibly. If Serbia is pro-European, the perspectives for peace and stability in the Western Balkans and for its integration into EU will be greatly increased. Otherwise, new tensions, including security tensions, cannot be ruled out. I think that we should therefore do everything in our power to integrate Serbia into the West. And this will not be an easy task. But it is one that will pay off. That would be my brief introduction, and I'm much more ready to answer any of your questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Pahor. So, I mean, this is, you're making some theses which are, some of them are well known in DC in the sense of about the importance of staying strong in support for, in the support of Ukraine as it experienced a Russian invasion. Others still are kind of, they push us to think in terms of broader near-term and longer-term issues, such as, are we going to see a new divide and a new wall? And so that's where I want to push you a little bit more to kind of unpack some of these processes. So we can imagine, we do agree that we see, I see the war in Ukraine as a war of attrition, where both sides are stuck. Ukraine is getting tremendous military support from the US, and EU has been developing more security mechanisms and is supporting more military. However, we also see that, for example, Russia now is kind of stuck in Ukraine. You see Sweden and Finland applying for NATO. Finland is already in. Russia is less able. We recently had an event here at Georgetown where we looked at Central Asia, and Russia is less able to intervene there, partly because it's focused in Ukraine. So, in terms of where do you see the new realignment of, say, Russia, the autocratic surge versus the democratic one, and we can leave Serbia for a moment aside, and we'll get back to it later, but where do you see, most of the countries that are clearly, would you say, that are more aligned to the autocracy, and where do you see countries that are aligned to democracy, and if there is some overlap within the EU, there's a lot of issues that we've looked at in terms of Hungary and Poland right now.
Well, this is a very good question. We don't have a map of Europe in front of us, but let us say so. Where the line of interest of EU is, there is a line of the conflict with the Russians. So, when back in 2014, Brussels said, okay, we are okay with Ukraine being closer to Europe, Putin has invaded Crimea. It was not about NATO at that time, it was about EU. You are asking about those mixed, territories countries. One would be Moldova, the second one would be Georgia. And going down, we would come to Serbia and to Western Balkans. So I think that this curtain will be very easy to define. On one side will be United Europe, on the other side will be autocracies, Belarus at the north, and then to the south, The question is, we've been a couple of days ago in Uzbekistan. What will happen with countries there, Will go with Russia, will let Putin to take them in a soft way, or they will try to be outside of this sphere of influence. But I think finally, at the end of the day, will be a part of smooth or soft, would be better word to use, of this sphere of influence. So would make normal relations with EU, and also EU normal relations with them. And once again, when talking about democracy and autocracy, there is a line between two systems, as it used to be before the fall of Berlin Wall. Do not forget, Putin is very nervous about democratic processes in his country, in countries around the Russia. When the opposition in Belarus has taken some momentum, well, Putin has increased his political and also then military presence in Belarus. So I do not have any doubt about it that unfortunately, there will be once again some sort of divide between East and West, and that there will be two divisions, one on democracy and number two on the sphere of influence of Russia. Once again, I would like to say to you that Ukraine is different than Afghanistan and some other countries you are talking. Ukraine, in his mind, as far as I know him and his mentality and his reflections, Ukraine has always been in his mind part of broader Russia. Sometimes he's willing to say that Ukraine is not a nation. Ukrainian people are not the Ukrainian nation. So goes very, very far, and that is why I'm very pessimistic. Let me say that I was completely wrong. A couple of days before his invasion to Ukraine, I've been to Munich Security Conference. I've been asked by many colleagues and friends what I did think, and I said, no, I think it would be, just crazy that Putin would invade Ukraine, because this will be a, some sort of chaotic decision with no chance that he would control it. And unfortunately, he did. And unfortunately, now nobody has definitive control on what is going on, and the war will be a very long war.
Thank you. Thank you. The next question is more in terms of domestic politics in Western Balkans, and we see that there's strong Russian influence in Serbia, as you mentioned. However, it's also in
Republika
Srpska, its impact in Montenegro, and at lesser extents, but there's some media and political party influence in the rest of the region as well. 20% I recently came from Bulgaria. 20% of Bulgarians get their news mostly from Russian sources as well. So I think within that case, and the fact that several of those countries are, Bulgaria is already part of EU, but the rest of the others are trying to join the European Union at a time when they have deep reforms, institutional reforms that they need to make, as well as we notice some fatigue at the European Union. So when you talk then about deepening the European Union integration, does this also mean enlarging the European Union, or going more in depth and making sure that the current members are behaving according to the rules?
Well, there is a enlargement fatigue back in Brussels. I know it. I've been a member of European Parliament, and for 50 years there is a ongoing debate on Turkey. Yes, it is very difficult to imagine that this process will go, smoothly. But on the other hand, I am convinced that the only way to prevent Western Balkans to become a sphere of influence of Russia, China, and others, it is to basically to go there with enlargement. And now this is very difficult, because you know how complex this process of enlargement is. It's not like NATO. It's much more complex. NATO is much less complex. But I do not see any other possibility to protect Western Balkans from being a second front for Putin, if he decided so, than to, invite the Western Balkans as soon as possible to European Union. I know how difficult it is. I know how many problems this creates, how difficult it would be to achieve this, but there is no other alternative than this one. Maybe somebody would say that we are facing NATO's presence there. Albania is a member of NATO. Montenegro is a member of NATO. Macedonia, North Macedonia, has been now joined NATO, and finally, started a negotiation with EU. Maybe, I'm saying just maybe, the time has come to think about Bosnia and Herzegovina to be a member of NATO. But, and you said it before, Professor, there is Republika Srpska. I think if there would be just question for Croats and Muslims or Bosniaks in Bosnia, probably there would be a consensus to join NATO. But because of Serbs there, Republika Srpska, probably such a consensus could not be reached at this very moment. That is why I'm saying, if President Vučić, if Serbia would opt for East, for West, for Brussels, that would be much more easier to achieve than, as we can see now, when Vučić is not sure 100% what to do. To go versus Brussels or to go versus Moscow. And this creates problem at the moment. I don't know, and probably nobody here knows, for how long this could go on without any consequences. That is why I'm saying, if the war will go on in Ukraine, if Putin would decide to visit Moldova, maybe Georgia, I'm pretty sure that at the end of this process, Western Balkans will be there on his list. Because Republika Srpska is ready to collaborate with him. That's the problem. If nobody else, maybe not Serbia, but Republika Srpska with Dodik is ready to work with Putin directly. And this is a serious threat, and I would not underestimate it. That I would not say before in the capacity of President of Republika Slovenia, but now when I'm not, I could say it because I feel so.
Yes, thank you for the candid response. In a minute, I'm going to open it to questions. I wanted to just to follow up with a question about the role of Slovenia as an EU country. And right now, EU is fully supporting Ukraine. In Europe, though, you are actually feeling the impact of the war even more closely with gas prices, food prices, refugees, than we in the US are. Do you sense, like, in your conversations with other leaders and kind of, of EU democracies, that there is a concern that resolve might grow weaker the longer this goes on and the more the impact continues?
Well, in 2010, when I used to be the Prime Minister, we decided with Croatian Prime Minister to started a new initiative in Western Balkans, so-called Brdo-Brijuni initiative. And this initiative is still alive. After 13 years, we've been able, no matter about differences among us, to meet every year, maybe even twice. By the way, once even Vice President Biden was our guest, and all bunch of leaders from Europe, from Angela Merkel to French President and everybody else. Now, so this is one answer to your question about the role of Slovenia. Slovenia has started this initiative. I've been very engaged in this process, and I hope so very much that the Madam President will continue to follow this. Slovenia has a unique position in the region because we are friends with everybody. We do not have a very particular interest to be with one against another. So that is why we are welcomed in every country in the region. That is why I think our words have some credibility. Maybe this has also changed the perspective of Brussels versus Western Balkans. I do remember years ago, I repeated and repeated in Brussels, talking to my colleagues, members of parliament, members of the commission, members of the council, please do invest much more in Western Balkans. No, come on, this is not important. We are tired of this process of enlargement. But now, with the war in Ukraine, things are drastically changed. Last year, I drafted some sort of idea to give the status of candidacy to Bosnia, and the Brussels has followed that idea, and I think in mid-December, Bosnia has finally get something that, peoples there, all three nations have some sort of proof that Brussels is taking care about Bosnia. So my criticism of the politics of EU versus region is that is dealing too much with you know, specific countries, but not with the region as whole. We should see the region as it is, not just particular countries. So I think much more should be done with a little bit more aggressive, not aggressive, passion, you know, enthusiasm for the region. And this will help, I mean, Europe a lot in the future. If not, once again, if war go on in Ukraine, I think Putin is thinking about Western Balkans as a second front if that would be necessary.
Thank you. I'd like to first invite you to stand up and stretch for 10 seconds. We've been sitting for 35 minutes. And then turn around and talk to each other. Talk to one or two people next to you for 1 or 2 minutes. We're going to collect 3 questions at a time. And I want to make sure we get the diversity of viewpoints. So I know it's unusual. Trust the process. Thank you.
No problem.
At this point, like, if I would go all the way off, it might just be I don't know. I just seems okay. He's kind of tall. I think it works right now.
Okay.
You just can't move it.
Like him.
He's gonna catch this guy.
I saw you belong to your group. Yeah. I'm like, I'm trying to figure out why.
God, because I had to memorize this stuff, I don't remember. It's like it's like multitasking. Anyway.
No. Rather like this. Down.
No, I had to like for snacks, and I didn't remember anything.
No, everyone did half it.
Okay, thank you. All right, so we're going to collect some questions. When you do that, can you please also identify yourself? If you're a student, what you study. So let's see. All right, I have, if you raise your hand, I'll start collecting them. So, okay, all right.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to start here, and then there. Okay, yes.
Great. Hello, I'm Robert Shoda. I'm from the Republic of Kosovo. It was delightful to hear you, especially speak very frankly and directly. Definitely a breath of fresh air. My question is this: apart from Kosovo and as being one of the Serbia's political swamps, let's say that is fixed. What are the 2 other major challenges for Serbia to turn to Brussels and not to Moscow?
Thank you.
Hi, Kelly Smith, Center for Eurasian Russian East European Studies. So my question, I'm going to show my age here, but I remember when there was a thing called the non-aligned bloc, and I wonder whether you think there'll be some movement of countries that don't fit either with the democratic West or the Putin, bloc, so to speak. And if you think that's something that could be likely, what would it look like?
Hello, my name is Isaac Hawkins. I'm a student in the SFS, and our group really, we're just thinking, what would an expansion of the EU look like in terms of some underlying issues between member states or potentially new member states, and would we have to soften our regulations for new members?
Thank you.
Okay, question number one, Serbia. I think my friend and President Vučić has some problems. I think, basically, and I can say this freely, being no more the president, I think he's willing to do some brave steps towards Brussels, away from Moscow. But he's a victim of his own success. He persuaded the majority of Serbian publics that Russia is very important for their future. Now, he cannot move without, some sacrifices, number one. And it's up to him to decide. He will do something or he will wait and the time will then, blow him away. I hope so very much, being his friend, that finally, at the end of the day, he will decide that the time has come to do a brave and bold move and take the very first step towards EU integration. I mean, not just formally and, but, maybe to go with the sanctions or, go with this agreement on the recognition of independence of Kosovo, whatever, number one. Number two, it is obviously Kosovo-Pristina-Belgrade dialogue. I think this issue, the issue of so-called Srpski Svet, somebody knows what this does mean, but okay, do not enter the details. There is some sort of, mindset back in Serbia that all Serbs that are living in surrounding countries should be in one way or another under the, control of Belgrade, That's a problem. I mean, Vučić should accept a new, a new reality that Serbia is Serbia, and Bosnia is Bosnia, and Kosovo is Kosovo, and Montenegro is Montenegro. It's not, some sort of, sphere of influence of Serbia. This is number two. It's very difficult to accept this. Number three, and this goes with the question that you've put it before. For a long time, before the war in Ukraine, the position of Serbia has been very, unique. They had a good relations basically with Brussels, but also excellent relations with Moscow, excellent relations with China, excellent relations with Turkey, excellent relations with countries in Gulf. So, in a way, you asked before, Vučić, not saying loudly about it, was conducting some sort of politics of non-alignment, in different way. But in my view, the time has come to decide, because there will be no third bloc. There will be two blocks, if I'm right. There will be two blocks. No, I think there will be no way for somebody to sit on different chairs at the same time. It was a very comfort situation for Serbia for a long time after the decline of Milosevic. But now, because of the war in Ukraine, this comfort has gone away. So this is also an answer to your question. So before we will see some great changes in foreign politics of Serbia, I think Serbia has to address one issue and one issue in particular, and this is, it is ready to go away from Russia, or he's not so bold and will stay in the sphere of influence of Russia. But bear in your mind, nobody from Serbia, as a young people, would like to go to Russia to live there. Everybody would like to go to the United States or Europe. They would like to go to the West. So I think it's crystal clear to President Vučić what should be done. That the problem could be done in a way that he would survive politically and personally. Do not forget that former Prime Minister Đinđić has been killed back in 2003-4, I think, because of liberal and pro-European politics. It's dangerous stuff in Serbia, being very devoted to pro-European politics. That is why I respect President Vučić for what he was doing and what he is doing, but he's afraid of himself. So that is why I think he's one day so, another day so on this issue with Kosovo. He would like to go on, but then he would like to not go on so fastly. So, but because he's not decided yet on the basic question, what to do with Serbia in long term, as far as Russia or EU is concerned. And that is the answer to you, ma'am. I think there will be no space for so-called unaligned country. Moldova is not trying to be there in the middle between EU and Russia. Moldova wants to be a member of Beijing, and Ukraine has now a status. Before the war, there would be no political will to give the status to Ukraine. Bosnia has the status now. Before the war in Ukraine, I think there would be no chances to give the Sarajevo the status to basically to start a negotiation with EU. Also North Macedonia. I would not underestimate the problems our friends in Macedonia have with Bulgaria. These problems will go on, but we all pressured so much on Sofia to change, this blockade, that finally this has been changed. So I would like to show to you that the war in Ukraine is changing the whole geopolitical situation in Europe. I would say with steps which are not so bold as should be, with the, with the dynamic that is too slow, in my view, but basically things are changing. And that is the only hope I have for a really lasting peace and stability. If Europe will enlarge, that would mean that finally larger space in Europe is under democratic control and values, and there is a chance, at least, for the good perspective of the more than half of the continent. But the other half will be on the other side, and do not underestimate Russia and China now is obviously is going into a new chapter of collaboration. This will mean a lot of consequences also for Europe. And basically, once again, I would like to address this important issue. I think that this will change also the EU itself. I think EU will go versus something that could be called United States of Europe, not as a melting pot as United States, but in a way will deepen the collaboration between 27, maybe 30 and more countries in the future. I'm pretty sure. If this will not be the case, I'm ready to say that will be a very, very problematic perspective and future for all nations that now are included in the European Union. So I hope very much, I praise the God that the future will be as I described.
Thank you. Let's take another round, and I realize let's take another round. You can raise your hand. Okay. I'm going to start here. I want some gender representation too. So I'm going to start here, and then we have two that have spoken this far. Okay. Yeah.
Hi, thank you so much for coming. My name is Isa. I'm in the SFS studying global business and justice and peace studies. And my question is, you touched briefly on the relationship between Russia and China. I was wondering if you could expand on the role of the ongoing great power competition between the US and China in the resolution of the Eastern European tensions.
Hello, my name is Marco. I'm an undergraduate student at SFS. So we've kind of seen an ability for Russia to invade the EU and US's selective sanction regime by the way of middlemen countries in the Western Balkans and Georgia, in the Caucasus. So how do we how does EU and Brussels kind of balance the need to draw those countries nearer and at the same time stop critical goods like semiconductors from going to potentially pro-Russian countries and then aiding them indirectly in their war effort?
Hello, I'm Ben, a junior in the business school studying international business. If the end of the Russia-Ukraine conflict ends in a sort of two spheres of influence that you were touching on, how active would you, as a European leader, like to see the U.S. in involving itself in the Western Europe sphere of influence? After the Second World War, the U.S. involved itself in many ways across the world. So, what would you like the U.S. role to be in that scenario?
The first question was on Russia, I think. Sorry, who was the first? Yeah, you've asked me about, sorry, about
the role of the
yeah, China, sorry, yeah.
China.
Russia, China, yes, sorry. This is a very, very important consequence of the war in Ukraine. We know historically Russia and China has been, for the most time on two different sides. China would be the small brother, Russia would be, the leader of some sort of collaboration. Things are completely changed now. China has the key for many things that Russia would like to have, and vice versa. Because of, same interest of two countries, Russia and China, to fight against the West, which is, in their view, imposing democracy to their countries, they are ready to work together. And this could be huge. Because it's, democracy is threatening their power. It's not, that this is academic discussion, like, I don't know, something else in international politics. It's about the power. Who has the power in Russia and China? And they don't want to be imposed by the values from US and Europe. This is much more decisive than anything else, even the power of military, and the weapon and all that stuff. So democracy. Democracy is a threat to both Russia and China. Now, I think they will go along. In a way, they are pressured to try to get along. At this very moment, it is so important that China would not change the position on war in Ukraine from being, in a way, neutral to, in a way, support Russia in different ways, also economically and all that stuff. In my view, I'm not an expert on Asia, but I think Russia, if the war will go on, will more and more depend on China. And the issue of Taiwan will become more and more sensitive issue for China, for Russia as a leverage, and for the West, the US in particular. So I'm a little bit afraid that we would not control this issue enough, and that could be in the future the next critical point of international peace and stability. So, as I said, how to deal with one China policy on one side, but also to, say very clearly to Beijing that there is a red line. You should not use the force to invade the Taiwan. If you do that, that would be a major crisis. And we see how Russia is trying to, influence Beijing to do something. That Russia is obviously trying to enlarge the conflict in the world, from Ukraine to, as I said, Western Balkans, and it would be delighted if there would be a conflict in Taiwan. So this is really something new, I think, something very new, and it should be observed and analyzed, and more than ever should be treated as a very sensible political issue, which requires some sort of, very, very smart political moves there. Very smart, very smart. Now, the second question, Macron presented maybe a year or two ago this idea of political unity. He was very well aware that there is a enlargement fatigue and that probably there will be no consensus for the enlargement. He is not ready for enlargement. That is why he went with this initiative for political unity, even before the war in Ukraine. And before the war in Ukraine, the majority has a little bit refused this idea as the way how to, escape the debate on enlargement. Now, after the war in Ukraine has happened, everybody is much more prepared to think about this idea because of the question you, ma'am, has posed before, not to, leave any country which is prepared to be with us to be with Putin. So that, this political unity would not be EU as formal, alliance of member countries, but would be an alliance with also non-member countries in the sphere of influence of EU. And let me say one thing that I've been very cautious about saying it before, but as every global power has its sphere of interest, also EU is in a position to think about its sphere of interest. And this is crystal clear. Should be there. Should be there. And I think, I know it's politically delicate to debate this issue, from the point of political correctness. This is not a word in Brussels to be used, sphere of influence of Brussels. But okay, I'm not a politician anymore. I can speak freely, and I think the time has come that Brussels should think in these terms. To have a sphere of interest, I think the political unity is in a way, a method to go there in a way that Macron has presented it, and maybe, just maybe, Europe will, through this war in Ukraine, find another, strong passion to make some bold moves to go ahead, on with deep integration, with a little bit more strategic autonomy, you know. And this goes also for the last question, you know, US and Europe in the context of new geopolitical consequences of the war in Ukraine. I've been always pro-NATO. I think NATO is still very important for the security of Europe, but being so, you know, so devoted to NATO, I would like to see some more bold moves of EU towards more strategic autonomy, also in the sphere of you know, military, in the sphere of security. I think this is not something against US. This is something in context of good transatlantic relations. So what we are watching right now, ladies and gentlemen, we are watching completely new reality in Europe that requires new answers to all and new questions. Before the war in Ukraine, we could escape from those questions. Were too much politically complex, too much politically, you know, costly, expensive. Now the time has come to be addressed, and we need some brave politicians to do so.
Great. Thank you. I have time for one or two questions. I know we have one here, and then there's another one too.
I'm Peter, I'm a student. So my first question was kind of already addressed, but I guess my second would be, now that you're, I guess, you're on like political pause from the Slovenian political sphere, what is your like personal plan now? Like, will you be getting back involved?
You know, after 32 years in politics, it was enough. Yeah, I've been so from deputy, from member of national parliament to the European Parliament, Speaker of the House, Prime Minister and President twice. So basically, there is no job left there to be done. So no, I would like to share my experiences with those who are coming into the center of political power, you know. And if any of my advice would be useful, I would be more than happy, you know. I will remain focused on Western Balkans because of different reasons, but basically I'm there. If anybody would like to ask me something, I'm there to give a very honest answer, and then it's up to him or her to do whatever he or she would like.
Excellent. On that note, please join me in thanking Dr. Pahor.
I didn't want to say I'm not doctor, so but it was so nice to yeah, just continue.